Good evening. I would like to call to order the regularly scheduled Planning Commission for November 15th. It is now 6:01, and if we could start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will ask myself to lead us with that.
Right hand on your heart.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
And then we could do a roll call.
Buttons are missing. There we go. All right. Okay. Commissioner Fresco?
I'm here, but my.
Yeah. It needs to be in discussion mode.
I had to hit a unique button to get mine. Hit the RTS mic button. Oh, that's even cute.
I think you have to switch it to discussion.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's in the mayor's.
It's saying that I'm in queue.
There we go.
How's that?
Discussion.
Yes.
There you go.
I like it better when I can control you guys.
Here.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton. That was a here.
Here.
Commissioner Landris.
Here.
Commissioner Raskin.
Here.
Commissioner Tolkien.
Here.
And Chair Reese.
Present. Okay, with that, I would like to make a quick announcement on the agenda. We did do some agenda management before the meeting, and item 7A has been continued to December 6th. So if you are here to talk about 7A, please know that is not on our agenda tonight. Next, I will turn to the Planning Director's report.
Okay. David couldn't be here this evening. So just on upcoming Planning Commission meetings, December 6th is going to be your next regular meeting, and the development review permit extension for 1318 Lincoln has been continued to that meeting. There will also be a study session. December 20th, we don't have any items for that meeting, and generally speaking, it's pretty close to the holidays, so we're going to cancel that meeting. I don't think we can get some good public participation in that one. So in the new year, in January, your first meeting will be January 17th, 2024, which is going to be the introduction of the Phase 2 implementation of the housing element. So that work is continuing. In terms of City Council, past actions, October 24th, there was an IZO that was introduced for first reading to allow 2 existing medicinal cannabis retailers to convert to adult use cannabis sales. Those second reading was passed last night, so it will take effect in 30 days. November 28th, we'll be returning to council, just the nature of the IZOs for the extension of that for 2 years while we work on the actual regulatory ordinance and also development of a social equity program. December 12th at council, that will be the IZO for the SB 35 objective design standards, which is the subject of your study session tonight. Over the last couple of weeks, I guess, we have held a number of public workshops, so I just want to provide the commission an update on those. It was a public workshop on the objective design standards that was well attended. We got great comments at that workshop. And then we held town halls on the relationship between the AHPP and state density bonus. Also well attended. We had about more than 40 people on the virtual town hall. And then we had some repeat attendees at the in-person town hall. There was probably about 14 people, I think, that came to that. The recordings are all up on the respective websites, as are the presentations. So if you missed it, it's on the Housing Element website, it's Town Hall, so feel free to peruse that at your leisure. And that concludes the report.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Landers.
You might be able to keep us updated on the Vision Zero work as it relates to, we had the great presentation on the bike action plan and the pedestrian action plan. I want to say that Tanya Musser was the stepmother of one of my very oldest friends. And so her loss is deeply felt. And I know that there was another crash and council, fortunately not a fatality, and council took some action last night, I believe. And so it would be great if we could be at least kept updated on the progress as it's going. Even information items, because I know
Yeah,
council,
we
this
will.
will be following this.
We will consult with our partners in mobility with respect to that work. And,
Great.
and you are correct. Council did give direction last night for staff to create a work plan and comprehensive framework around Vision Zero.
Great. And then while I'm at it, just one other item, and again, not a rush, but I'd love to put a marker down. I believe the city of Los Angeles is doing some work on West Side Mobility, connecting Santa Monica to the east and connecting Santa Monica to Marina del Rey. And they've just got through their workshops. Again, this is more an info item, but just so that, we're kept in the loop, it would be great, I think, for us to know what's happening and how Santa Monicans can get safely to some of the places in LA from which we are somewhat disconnected, or at least not connected by really well buffered bike lanes.
Yep, sure.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Hamilton?
I was also going to make a comment about the crash that happened on 19th in Idaho. I was pleased to see the council take action on that. I've ridden my bike up and down Idaho many times. And it is a boulevard that is mostly two-way stops for whatever reason. And on a bike, it is definitely a much more dangerous situation when you don't have a four-way stop. So I wanted to draw attention to that, and also second the desire to see, how the bicycle action plan will be updated given council's action.
Okay. I think I will just make a comment on the town halls you did on the HPP and St. Density Bonus. I appreciate you doing that. I thought that was very interesting, and I think it was educational to a lot of people in the community to really show that relationship. So I support those kind of educational efforts for the community.
Great, thank you. And I realize actually I'm missing one item on December 6th. There will be a resolution of intention for amendments to our local implementation of state density bonus law in light of AB 1287. That does make some substantive changes. Consistency with state law.
Great.
Actually,
Yes.
if maybe this, like APA California has sent this to you and we could see a copy, if there's a rundown on the new state laws from the last session, it'd just be great to get a cheat sheet.
I feel like we're even catching up from like last year.
I feel like we're catching up from 2019, but
yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah, absolutely. There are great resources out there we will share with the commission. Yeah.
I can tell you right now that SCAMP, this Southern California, they have a very good website where they track these things, but they move so quickly. My office tries to track them too, and it's moving very, very quickly.
SB4. I'm sorry, I have to say this. We were first. Santa Monica did what SB4 does 2 years ago under our housing element, so we should be proud of that.
HCD didn't seem to give us a lot of credit, but okay. Okay, with that, let's move on. We had director's report, planning commissioner announcements. I think we have anybody from the public, but if you happen to walk in and you happen to be listening to us on the radio, you need a chit in the back of the room and hand it up to the commission secretary to speak. With that, I'll ask if any planning commissioners have any announcements. Commissioner Hamilton?
Attend the December 6th meeting.
hear that, but thank you very much. Commissioner Landris, you have something?
Yeah, I'm heading to CoMotion LA tomorrow, and we'll be attending a couple of interesting sessions and hope to bring back interesting stuff.
Great. Okay, I think that's all the announcements for right now. So we'll move on to, next agenda item is public input, and this is public input on anything that's not on the agenda. And I don't see anybody jumping up for that item, so I'm going to move on. Item 7, we've continued item 7A, so we move on to 8 in our study session. This is a discussion and possible direction regarding setback requirements affecting use of electric. We could get a staff report, please.
Okay. In the Office of Sustainability and the Environment, where I lead our policy and programs related to building and transportation decarbonization. And I'm here tonight to discuss some challenges equipment, specifically heat pump HVAC equipment. And so we're seeking guidance from you tonight on how best to address this issue so more residents can shift to more sustainable and efficient electric alternatives like heat pumps. So I'll start off by providing some context and just shedding light on why this issue is of particular importance to the Office of Sustainability. And I've included a snapshot of our climate action and adaptation plan here, also known as the CAP, where we show that emissions from gas use in buildings account for about 19% of our carbon emissions. And the CAP has a goal of reducing emissions 80% by 2030 and getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. And one of the strategies outlined in the CAP is a plan to achieve reductions from existing buildings by converting natural gas equipment to more efficient electric alternatives. So the primary sources of fossil fuel use in buildings are space and water heating and cooling, which can be replaced by heat pump HVAC systems like heat pump HVAC units and water heaters, respectively. So there are different types of heat pump equipment technology, but for this study session, I'll primarily be focusing on heat pump HVAC systems because this equipment typically is located outside and doesn't always fit within the city's setback requirements, and there aren't currently allowable projections into the setback for this equipment. And it's becoming a growing issue just as heat pumps are becoming more popular, which is a good thing climate-wise, and there's also a lot of increasing funding opportunities available from the federal, state, regional, and local sources. So just briefly, at the federal level, there's now tax credits of $2,000 for heat pumps for homeowners and renters. Next year, we'll be seeing up to $8,000 upfront direct discounts, upfront incentives for low-income households. And then our office also runs a local program called Electrify Santa Monica, which offers rebates for a range of different equipment like EV chargers and e-bikes, or soon-to-be e-bikes, and heat pumps. We offer up to $600 for heat pump HVAC units. The program's temporarily on hold due to funding, but we're expecting to open early next year again. And now I'll just go over, I'm sure many of you are at least a little bit familiar with the technology, but just briefly for those who are not. So heat pumps use electricity to both heat and cool a space. So like a traditional AC unit, they take heat from inside the home and pump it out to provide a cooling effect. But unlike air conditioners, they also can operate in reverse. So they draw heat from outdoors and bring it inside to warm the home, resulting in peak efficiency. A furnace that burns natural gas to create heat can only reach around 95% efficiency, whereas a heat pump can easily reach 300 to 400% efficiency, which essentially means that it can generate 3 to 4 times more energy than it consumes. So compared to gas furnaces, heat pumps can also improve indoor air quality by serving as air purifiers. And because they're so efficient, they can result in cost savings on utility bills as well. This isn't always going to be the case, especially in temperate climates like Santa Monica, where many homes don't already have air conditioning. So installing a heat pump that can also now be run in cooling mode would result in a new source of electricity demand. But with the increasing temperatures due to climate change, more residents are interested in installing AC, so heat pumps are by far a more sustainable option compared to traditional AC units. So there's growing demand due to incentives available. Heat pumps are also becoming less expensive. Technology is improving, and Santa Monica, like many areas, are getting warmer. Last year, more heat pumps were sold in the U.S. than gas furnaces, and this trend is expected to continue. We also have state policy driving this adoption of various electric appliances. In 2022, the California Air Resources Board scoping plan released a target to limit the installation of new fossil fuel appliances, including gas, space, and water heating by 2030. The Southern California Air Quality Management District is also working on a regional policy to phase out NOx-producing appliances like gas furnaces, and they're following in the footsteps of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which earlier this year adopted a similar policy where they'll require only zero NOx water heaters to be sold and installed by 2027, and zero NOx furnaces by 2029. And electric heat pumps are really the only zero NOx options that can comply with these new rules. So, and here we have a snapshot of some feedback that we've heard some residents, and so really to dig into why we're here. I just talked a lot about how great heat pumps are, but there are some cases where residents can't install them under our current zoning code. So we've heard some of these issues, like the most common place for a heat pump, HVAC unit, and condensers typically is the side yard, but our zoning code requires an 8-foot interior side setback for parcels over 50 feet. And as I mentioned, there aren't currently allowed projections for mechanical equipment. So other locations can be the roof, but sometimes the pitch of the roof is too steep, or it could be too expensive to install on the roof or mount it on the side of the building. Or in one instance, we heard the rear yard, as defined by our code, is actually owned by a different resident and is inaccessible to the adjoining unit, so they're unable to place the equipment there. So there are other examples we've heard, but this is just an overview. And then here we have just a look at the setback requirements. So from zoning code section 908, which, as you can see, has in the R2 and R3 and R4 zones, 8 feet required for parcels 50 feet or wider, and then it drops a little bit for smaller parcels. And here we have the projections that are allowed. So the top one is a section of this zoning code where it notes that air conditioners, compressors, and the other equipment listed there aren't currently allowed to project into the setback areas, so particularly the interior side setback. So one of the main questions we're asking you to think about tonight is whether the commission would be supportive of allowing this type of equipment to project into side yard setbacks. And I'll go over some other items to consider, including the noise implications of making this type of amendment. So I have here a snapshot of the Santa Monica's exterior noise standards. We're mostly focused on noise zone 1, which is the residential district in that red box there. So you can see that the acceptable nighttime noise levels are between 50 to 55 decibels, and daytime at 60 to 65 decibels. And I included just a list of noise levels from some example equipment that can be found, just to provide a context, some context for the range of decibel levels. So in Santa Monica, noise levels are currently measured at the receiving property line. So the equipment sound rating shown here would register as slightly lower depending on how far the equipment is from the property line. And it's just a general rule, as distance from a noise source doubles, its noise level drops by 6 decibels. So, for example, a heat pump with a noise rating of 60 decibels would measure 54 3 feet away. The range for heat pump HVAC units is from 46 to 75 decibels. That's from a noise study that we found. But the average ratings tend to be between 56 to 58, which is below the maximum daytime levels and just slightly above the nighttime levels. And I know that heat pump inverter systems actually tend to be much quieter than regular heat pumps. The city of Palo Alto actually, they recently went through a pretty extensive amendment to their zoning code and noise ordinance to allow more electrification equipment. And they increased the decibel levels that are allowed for heat pump inverters as a result of pretty significant public comment they received at their council meeting, that noting that these units can run for a long time at a lower speed, which means that they tend to be a lot quieter than regular heat pumps. So we included a list of some common equipment and sound level ratings in attachment E of your packets. But I also added here the dimensions of the equipment listed, just so that you can see what kind of projection we would be talking about in order to accommodate some standard equipment. So most units tend to be around 3 feet wide by just over a foot deep at 13 inches. And we looked at some of our peer cities and other cities in California to see how they allow for this type of equipment. And in reviewing other setback requirements, there was a pretty wide range of how cities handle this. But we did find that Santa Monica tends to have a more restrictive setback requirement than most jurisdictions, with a minimum required distance of the 8 feet between the equipment and the property line. So in the County of LA, equipment like water heaters can project up to 2.5 feet into the side yard, as long as the equipment is at least 2.5 feet from the property line. Wall and window mounted AC units can also project into any yard, as long as the equipment is at least 2.5 feet from the lot line. And then in West Hollywood, they have a 5-foot interior side yard setback for 1 to 2 story buildings, and an additional foot for each story above 2 stories. And mechanical equipment can project into the side yard setbacks in West Hollywood as long as there's 2.5 feet of distance between the equipment and the property line. So essentially the numbers there in that middle column are the minimum or the setback minus the allowable projection. And then also in West Hollywood, they have a unique approach to their noise standards. So mechanical equipment, including HVAC units, is exempt from noise regulations as long as the equipment is properly maintained and is operating as intended. Culver City has a 5-foot setback in R3 and 4 feet in R2. But equipment like AC units and water heaters are not allowed to project into the side setback. And then Malibu requires 3 feet of distance between the AC equipment, and equipment has to be screened by a wall or fence. And then Palo Alto, they require minimum setbacks with 3 feet between the equipment and property line. And they also amended their noise ordinance to allow electrification equipment based on sound ratings and setback distances. Berkeley allows heating and cooling equipment to project up to 1.5 feet into the interior side setback, as long as there's a 3-foot distance between the equipment and the lot line. And then Sacramento has no minimum distance between the equipment and the interior side yard, but the equipment has to be screened or landscaped. So a wide range, but those are just some examples. And here are some examples of noise mitigation strategies. So as I mentioned, some cities like Malibu and Sacramento have requirements like screening units and landscaping to help mitigate noise. In Malibu, ground-mounted air conditioning equipment has to be screened by a solid wall or fence on all sides, except in cases where the equipment is located next to a dwelling, in which case the equipment must be screened on the 3 sides not adjacent to the dwelling. In Sacramento, mechanical equipment, including heaters and air conditioners, can be located within the required front yard, interior side yard, or street yard, but only if the equipment is screened or landscaped. And And then we saw from one study that there can be a noise reduction from a wood fence of about 3 decibels. Oh, and also the equipment can operate in night mode, so it can be programmed to be quieter during the nighttime. Here's a map of some heat pump permit data that was pulled from 2015 through this year. So it includes heat pump HVAC and heat pump water heaters. We essentially searched an Excel report for heat pump within the work description and came up with these addresses. So you can see there's definitely a higher concentration of permits issued in the single family and also R2 zones north of Wilshire, and a pretty noticeable gap in the R2 and R3 zones between Wilshire and Pico, which is in the red square. And, it could be due to a number of reasons, but likely there's less space on these properties to accommodate equipment. Many probably have legal non-conforming setbacks. The gap also correlates with some of our lower income neighborhoods, and heat pumps historically have been more expensive and still are, but getting less expensive, especially with the with the rebates and incentives available. So we just wanted to note that this, could be tied to some equity impacts because limiting access to those who could benefit from reductions on utility bills is just something we want to think about because heat pumps are so much more efficient and can result in cost savings. So the last slide, we just have some guiding questions for you to consider. The first one, does the Planning Commission support, or would the Planning Commission support allowing heat pump HVAC units to project into a side yard setback? For example, like a 2.5-foot distance between the property line and equipment like they do in LA, the County of LA and West Hollywood. Should other equipment be included? In the city of Palo Alto, they have a broader term for electrification equipment that they created, which includes energy storage systems and PV equipment, EV charging equipment. One thing to note is I checked with the fire department, and they just noted per the fire code that energy storage systems have to have a minimum of 3 feet from doors and windows directly entering a dwelling unit. But then also just wanted to ask what other items should be considered in addition to noise and aesthetics and emergency access when determining appropriate setback requirements. And should the equipment be allowed to project into legal non-conforming setbacks? So I will open it up.
Commissioner Zimbo. Commissioner Fresco.
I'm just trying to think broader and probably display my lack of knowledge about heat pumps, but can they be installed in garages and basements at all if there's enough circulation?
If there's enough circulation, I believe so. I mean, the heat pump water heaters are typically installed in those areas, but outside.
Put a water heater indoors, but not a heater?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the condensers are typically placed outside. I'm not actually positive if they can be. I mean, I think a lot of properties probably don't have the space to put them in, like in multifamily units specifically. But that's something we can look into. I haven't really heard of them being placed there, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, there are a lot of like townhome places
Yeah.
where they don't have property, but they have these huge garages. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just something to think about. I don't know if it's possible, but if there's anything that we have that we're preventing it, if it is.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I'll definitely check into it. I was not a heat pump expert until very recently digging into a lot of this, so.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Oh, wait, I have one other question.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Fresco.
About the noise. So I think you said in your report that they're handling the noise issue in the industry. Is that like an actual thing? I mean, I got a decibel reader on my phone this afternoon. I was just walking around my house. You know, I have a funky old refrigerator that goes at, what was it, 45 decibels.
Oh, okay.
It's in an office, luckily.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the quiet, I'm just kind of curious if these sound levels that we're looking at are permanent or if they're really in flux right now.
I mean, from what I've read and heard is that noise levels have gone down for this equipment as it improves over time. And I was comparing it with like some standard HVAC equipment, and those definitely tend to be louder. Like I saw a lot in the 70 decibel range, or high 60s, whereas the heat pump HVAC systems tended to be like mid 50s to mid 60s, and then quieter for inverters. So, but again, I guess they can be set to night mode, and then as the distance increases, and especially if you have like landscape, like trees or a fence around it. So,
Did you just say that the heat pumps are actually quieter than gas heaters?
than traditional HVAC units, like the regular condensers.
Oh, like air conditioning.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, thank you.
Sure.
But for heat and air conditioning, they make the same amount of noise in this case?
I believe so. I'm not
He's
sure.
nodding yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
all right. Okay, I think I have a handle on it all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hamilton.
All right, I have a couple questions. So, is the heat pump a generic term, or a heat pump HVAC a generic term that can apply to any type of heat pump with any kind of fuel source, or is that just specific for electric only?
So heat pumps are electric. There are a number of like there's heat pump HVAC systems, heat pump water heaters, heat pump dryers, but the heat pump technology is electric.
It's purely electric. Okay, so any motion that we take over a heat pump is going to be solely for an electrified home, right? Okay. Do we have a similar type of noise map for Santa Monica that Palo Alto has for its city?
I don't think we didn't find an actual map, right?
We don't actually have a map, but the noise zones specify the districts that are in each.
If you're gonna speak, sir, you're gonna have to come up just to capture it on, for public
Oh,
record,
no,
please.
Elias. Sorry, this is my colleague Elias Platt-Bermeo.
Hello, Elias. Introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Elias Platt-Bermeo, also in the Office of Sustainability and the Environment as a sustainability analyst. So we don't currently have a map of the noise zones, but it could be pretty easy to generate based on what we know about, the districts that are in each noise zone. There's a few exceptions. So the Pier is excluded from noise zone 2, but the city doesn't currently have a visual to represent the noise zones, from what we understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I can clarify that. I mean, it's basically residential districts, commercial districts, and then the industrial conservation zone. It's like 3 different zones. Industrial conservation being generally the area around Olympic Boulevard.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the different zones. I'm just thinking that like within the noise zone 1, which is primarily residential, there are going to be some residential neighborhoods that are very quiet and some that are closer. And, if we had that, just ask if we had it mapped, because what it would possibly allow is for residents in those noisier areas to have a broader range of equipment that they could purchase.
Yeah. Map showing kind of like existing noise contours, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like what this is actually is these are maximums. This is the noise. This is for regulatory purposes, like, do not exceed.
Right.
This decibel rating in these zones. What I think you're asking for is like, what is the existing ambient noise level, right? Various areas throughout the city.
Right.
I don't think we have that mapped. Not aware of something like that. Our noise element, like, sort of established that, but it was done a very, very long time ago, so I'm sure it's outdated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton, can I hold on just a second? Commissioner Tolkien has a question. Is it directly related to this or?
Yes.
Okay, can I let him?
From department, because access is as much as important as the noise level.
Yeah, we did. I reached out to the fire department and they just noted that they wanted to maintain 3 feet of clearance to meet the fire code.
And they were okay with it.
Yeah, they said they didn't have any issues as long as that was met.
Say that wasn't exactly on the same point, but anyways, go ahead, Commissioner Hamilton. Do you have more questions?
No further questions right now.
Commissioner Landris?
I'm wondering, does staff have preferences? I was looking for preferences because it strikes me that there are a lot of things that make different kinds of noise. I mean, people have pools. Pool heaters go on at all hours of the day and night and make more noise than some of these heat pumps. And frankly, I lean toward the more permissive approach, provided that we ensure access. And I'm thinking, not simply fire access, but what is some awareness of what's behind, what's along that side yard. So I was just curious if staff had a preference. And similarly, with the decibel readings, is there a brand independent standard that would push, say, a Santa Monica purchaser toward the lower decibel? I think you said something about inverter heat pumps.
Yeah.
Right, where we could establish a preference. I'm asking this in the spirit of trying to avoid over-regulation. Let's keep it simple and understandable. And then the other thing that didn't come up, I don't think I saw it in the staff report, is maintenance. So with requirements for screening, sometimes that can make maintenance more difficult. So I'm not always inclined to insist on screening. It feels like aesthetics for the sake of aesthetics, unless there's a safety concern.
Right, right.
So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that too.
I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to go about it, but it seems like from looking at some of the other cities, having an allowable projection of 2.5 feet seems ample to accommodate the majority of the equipment, and it's not going to dramatically increase the noise. If someone, say, has 8 feet, they can meet the setback with 2.5 feet. It's not a extremely dramatic increase in noise, and they could still very well be within our maximum noise standards because, like I mentioned very briefly before, if the equipment is rated at, say, 65 decibels, the noise rating at the property line is probably going to be under 60, which is already allowable. So, I think we could potentially go the route of Palo Alto where they just make sure you include the decibel rating on the equipment and that's how it's regulated. But I just from kind of looking at necessary if the noise level rating on the majority of equipment isn't going to exceed our existing noise.
We would have to rewrite the noise standard to exempt heat pumps, right? So one way or another, we've got to open that.
Yeah.
We've got to open that box.
Yeah.
So so the question is, so what I hear you saying, just correct me if I'm wrong, is 2.5 foot projection, minimum side setback of 3, resulting in the minimum side setback of what? 3 feet, 5 feet? Where does that leave us?
A minimum.
That delta.
Yeah, so it would be about, if you have 8 feet and then minus 2.5, then you're at 6.5.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So, I'd be inclined to go to
Or sorry, 5.5.
Right, I'd be inclined to go down to 5.
Yeah.
Walk with a bike next to you, that sort of distance. Are you saying just exempt these heat pumps from the noise ordinance, provided that they have a rating?
I'm a little reluctant to do that in case
Right.
there are very noisy equipment,
Yeah.
and I don't want to, overwhelm code enforcement with a barrage of complaints. So, perhaps it would make sense to set a maximum decibel rating for the equipment
Okay.
and allow them.
Of like 70? 65?
I think 65 would be
65,
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a precedent for other equipment?
Do we
Do you know if we have precedent for other is there other equipment that's either exempt from the noise ordinance or
No.
set with a decibel limit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just for the context for your study session tonight, like we don't actually have like an active work item for this. This is, something that OSC has heard about and planners have heard about too.
Right.
From residents and sort of like we can't put this equipment anywhere. So it's kind of like a starting point tonight just to present the information to the commission and, try and just get a sense of, whether there's some openness to this. Because ultimately we would need direction from council, to like pursue an amendment and sort of go through the steps. So it's kind of a long process, yet. That being said, I mean, this issue of like noisy equipment in the side yards, like we have had some fairly long and, difficult neighbor disputes around noise. So I think it's just one that, we would probably need to do some education and outreach around this. Quiet. Complaints that we receive. So, generally, I mean, you'll see our zoning ordinance it's extremely restrictive in terms of like equipment located in side yards for that very reason. So it would definitely be a departure, from both our zoning ordinance now and, how we've approached this issue in the past.
You can install heat pumps on the drag racers on Ocean Park. I think that'd be great.
I will also note that I asked Building and Safety, if they're currently requiring any noise level ratings on heat pump equipment that goes through their permit review, and it's not required, but one staff member did say at Building and Safety that they recommend that they put the decibel level rating and that it not exceed 65 decibels. So there is some precedent, although it's not required, but of 65 decibels.
Hold on just a second. Let me see if we have questions, comments down on this side. You guys, go ahead, Commissioner Raskin. Vice Chair.
Yeah, apropos of what we're talking about here, once upon a time I lived on a 15th floor apartment in San Francisco, and it was directly across the street from an air compressor that made a repetitive noise, and that was the bane of my existence for 3 years. But it was below the noise ordinance, and so nothing could be done about it. And I've been brainstorming just amongst myself and friends about if there's a realistic way to regulate repetitive noises. I'd be potentially types of heat pumps within the scope of that. But I wonder too, the one thing that this brainstorming landed on is, maybe we need something like an official noise mediator in Santa Monica. Somebody, I'd hate to burden,
I want that job. Can I have that job?
No, but I mean, these things lead to lawsuits. These things lead to sleepless nights. It gets insane. And there are some DA's offices around the state, for example, that have mediation programs for this very thing. And wanting to make sure that we can bring our city infrastructure in line with best practices and modern technology, and I'd like to see that, but just from an enforcement perspective, I think we need to think creatively about how to do that, and perhaps a city noise mediator or something like that is the way to do it. But those are my thoughts, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Commissioner Tolkien, do you have any other comments, questions? Okay. Commissioner Hamilton?
Yeah, question. So I think is the standard that we're trying to apply here is the nighttime standard, right? Because that's 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The 15-minute continuous measurement period is 50 dBA. So we need to. Is that the standard that we need to be looking at? Because it appears. I mean, well, I guess that's my first question.
Yeah, I mean, that is the one within the noise ordinance that, currently most or a lot of the equipment would exceed. So it's tough because there are very specific calculations you can do with what a various decibel ratings will be at the receiving property line, but it's kind of hard to say offhand what we would need to amend that 50 to be in order to accommodate the equipment. I guess we could say something like there's an exemption for heat pump equipment as long as it doesn't exceed X decibel rating.
Right.
That could be one option.
Yeah.
But just an idea.
But okay, so we need to really then, because I imagine, obviously people are going to run this equipment at night when in those hot summer months when it's the reason why we all have AC in the first place.
Yeah.
And okay, so we need to really kind of focus on the nighttime standard. The other question I had is you do give a range of heat pumps, so you have an average of 56 to 58 dBA. But if you look at the range, you do have some that are at 46. Mm-hmm. And that would qualify for, we wouldn't have to make any changes if everyone was able to purchase the 46 dBA unit. Mm-hmm. So there is equipment out there that does qualify. It's probably more expensive. I guess thinking through this is well, if we increase the dBA standard to say 60 to accommodate today's technology, mm-hmm. we're not going to give manufacturers any kind of incentive to go below 60. And so I think that, the hope, I guess, is this becomes a more common technology and they have wider adoption, more, there's going to be more investment, more manufacturers are going to be entering into the space. More or less the free market's going to step in and agree. Produce the best heat pump at that 50 dBA standard. Mm-hmm. So I'm hesitant to increase that for today's technology because then you don't really take away that incentive. And I'm happy to know that there are units already on the marketplace that already meet all the standards that are already in place.
Yeah, those are good points. And I think when I was just doing some Googling, just to pretend I was someone looking for a heat pump and seeing what the equipment was that was out there, I didn't actually personally come across any of that or that level, but I pulled that from the Palo Alto's noise study that they did where they included that range. So that is actually a good thing to look into to see how accessible that equipment is, how many manufacturers make it, and how much more it costs, if it does cost more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The other question I had, so from what I think I heard you say earlier is of the noise?
It was 3 feet, I believe. Yeah. So, and as you double the distance, the sound level drops by 6 decibels, I think was the equation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we look at this as not just the noise, the actual noise of the unit, but how that, what's the actual dBA at the property line, assuming a 4-foot setback.
Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely look at that and come up with a table similar to Palo Alto did.
That's really what we're trying to control for. And I would just follow Commissioner Raskin's, what he said is, yeah, I think we're all very sensitive to noise, especially at night. And so I think I would want to try to maintain as quiet of a neighborhood as possible. So I'm more focused on like trying to adhere to the current standards. They probably make a lot of sense. There's probably already a lot of debate that went into the I'd be disinclined to increase that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, well, my turn is, and I generally agree with what I've heard tonight. Can you put up, you had a slide on your equipment and the sizes and the sound. So it's interesting because like the biggest one is also the one that makes the most noise. So that we can kind of, we would exclude that one out just with our policy of it can only encroach 2.5 feet.
That's like for a much larger facility too, like a commercial or something.
Okay, well, I mean, that's the one that makes the most
Yeah.
noise too, so that
Yep.
one goes away. And the width and the depth is the most important, and you're saying we could go 2.5 feet. And then if it was at 58, you're saying 3 feet away, it would get down to 52 decibel? Is that the general concept?
So the example I had is a noise level of 60 decibels would measure 54 3 feet away.
Okay. Well, it does seem like there's a workable standard, as Commissioner Hamilton said, of forcing people to use the more quiet version
Yep.
and then maintaining a minimum. Now, what that doesn't help us with is substandard setbacks, right? Because if
Right.
somebody wants to encroach,
Yep.
I would say they still have to maintain that 3 feet minimum or more. Less, but then I guess they're going to run into the fire issue of they need that minimum 3 feet, so it's never going to get less than 3 feet. So I think you're heading in the right direction with the solution there. I would I would also say should this only apply to retrofits, because new builds there's not a problem. I mean, they can design it within the proper setbacks.
Right.
And really what you're trying to attack is these existing facilities that don't have heat pumps. We want them to have heat pumps and they have no place to put it. So that's another thing, is maybe we should look at this is a carve out only for retrofits.
Yeah, that's an option.
I also think you need to expand the net further. I don't think it's just heat pumps. I think we need to look at all the other technology we want to put in, battery walls and electron. So there's no reason we can't put those in. I think we also need to look at having some exceptions on the roof. Because, not everyone's going to have a steep roof, and there's places you can put it on the roof, but we need to be able to have allowances. Let me see if I have any other questions here. I think that's generally it. I will say that I was at a USGBC event last week about electrification, and I raised this issue with a couple of the speakers. And two of them indicated they were pretty interested in providing me feedback, and I didn't get it at this point, but if I do, I would like to be able to pass that on to you. So I'm kind of wondering what your timing is and what the next steps are for this program.
Sure, that would be great. We don't have a specific timeline. This is just very much the first step to get your feedback. But whenever you can send us that feedback, we'll definitely review it. And then, if directed, we can certainly come back with more of a proposed policy sometime early next year or whenever.
Right, but when you say we're directed, we get directed we all get directed by the same group. How are they involved? How's the council involved with this discussion at this point?
They have not been yet. I guess I would defer to Jing if.
I mean, I guess, because like I said, we've received no direction from council to add it to our ginormous work plan. So I think even if we got that, we'd have to look at it in terms of priority of the things that we're able to work on. As you can see, depending on kind of how this unfolds, it's not just an amendment. If there is an amendment to the zoning ordinance, it does require opening up the noise ordinance, which opens up a whole nother can of worms, to ensure that everybody's kind of treated equally, right? It's not like you get to make more noise than someone else, or, it's hard to etch it out, like even within a specific zone. So, and our noise ordinance is based on the noise element, which is also very old. So, I think in terms of the timeline, we wanted to have this discussion just to kind of raise the issue with the commission tonight. And I think we envisioned, being able to, if the commission is interested in it, it could be, advocating to the city council, maybe,
Right now, it doesn't move very quickly.
No, it
because the
doesn't.
council's not paying attention to it. And even if they pay attention to it and they assign it to you guys or whoever's in charge of it, there's a lot of other work ahead of you.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
And, we wanted to note it because it is something that comes up quite a bit, with residents. And as Ariana indicated, it is something that is maybe in contravention to the city's, climate
Goals.
action,
Goals.
our goals.
So, but why would we have to open the noise ordinance? If the direction that I think what I heard was let's not open the noise, let's not increase the noise. Do we really have to open the noise element?
I think we don't know the answer to that only because the thing about the noise ordinance is that it's, you don't know until the equipment is like installed. It's not like you can project, what will happen to something, or, if we allow it closer, like right now, you can't put any equipment, in a side yard setback. We allow it closer. Like there's not really a way to estimate what it is until they install it. And it's like, oh, that doesn't work. And, are we in a position to tell people to rip out the thing they just spent thousands and thousands of dollars installing? Like that's sort of, I think that's like, we need more
But I
research
don't-
into that. So,
But okay, I hear what you're saying. But and again, who knows where this policy lands? But right now, what we're talking about is you don't get to exceed the noise element.
right.
And if they exceed the noise element, then they've violated
True.
a rule. We don't have to justify asking them to modify it.
Yeah, it's right now, they, if we moved it closer to the property line, that might sort of like unknowingly push people out of compliance, where maybe they might have been in compliance before. I think we would need to do more research into that, I guess. I hear what you're saying, like it may not necessitate that amendment, the end of it all. And if it doesn't, that does make things a little bit easier, I think.
Okay. Commissioner Landerson, then.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I mean, I think ultimately the noise ordinance is enforced through complaint calls, right? So, I mean, part of what we're looking at goes back to what Commissioner Raskin was talking about, which is, the really annoying sounds that might prompt somebody to call. But if we're looking essentially at a late night, at a question of volume, let's take our 58 our 58 decibel, and these are coming down to your point because efficiency makes it quieter. Noise is inefficient. Our 58 dB is going to hit 55 at the property line, and then 3 feet from the property line to the neighbor's bedroom is going to be down to 55 or below, right? So how many cases are we, I think the question that I'm raising is, what's the it's relatively low, and then it becomes buyer beware, because we say to the resident, to Commissioner Hamilton's point, we're encouraging manufacturers to go quieter, but we're also saying to the resident, look, good luck, right? I just really don't, I want to say this again because I think it's important. I really don't want to overregulate. I don't want to, having been through other things, I really don't want to put residents, it should be a very clear and easy move, and it should just be something that, that happens. It's very simple, like either you're in compliance or you're not. So I don't want to I don't want to make people do a lot of work to figure out whether they're in compliance.
I just wanted to clarify, when you say side yard setback, you're talking multi-family. Suddenly had flashbacks of, all those 50-foot Sunset Park R1 zones with 4-foot setbacks, and these things are roaring outside your window, even from the next property. That would be, it needs to be perhaps also a last resort if there isn't another way, if it's, maybe it's a thing that is a variance and not, which is not what Sean wants, but, to keep them out of side yards where possible.
Yeah.
We want people to like each other.
Right.
Happy people in a happy city.
Yeah.
I didn't say I didn't want that. I just said I wanted it to be really easy to understand.
Easy to understand. Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, I think we're going to get another bite at this apple. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick point. Chair, I thought the point that you made about this applying to retrofits was an important one. To the extent that we can avoid discussions about the effect of these minima on new construction, I think we should try to do that and just have it built into the design in a way that mitigates impacts.
Right.
So, yeah, great.
Can I just tell you one more thing? Just so you can feel good about yourselves.
I feel pretty good about
Well,
myself.
when we first got electricity in Santa Monica in 1893, the city installed 10 street lamps, and they were on from sundown until 2 a.m. unless there was a moon, and it took 200 gallons of oil a night to run them. So we're doing much better.
Wow. That is an interesting fact.
Isn't that horrifying? For 10 street lamps, yeah.
Commissioner Fresco has. I think we've given you some information for you to digest, and hopefully we'll have a further discussion about things. I think it is important to keep up with we're telling people we need to electrify. We got to give them an opportunity to do it. So we'll look forward to hearing more about this, and it'll be up to commissioners to bend the ear of some council people when we see them about this issue. And again, there's a lot of priorities in life.
Sure. Well, appreciate the feedback, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, we are going to move on to our next study session, which would be 8B, and this is the SB 35 Objective Design Standards, or also referred to as ODSs. If we could get a staff, ODSs. If we could
Sounds like a lot like ROUSs.
If we can get a presentation, please.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. So tonight is a little bit of a dual purpose. One is to explain what SB 35 is and where Santa Monica stands with respect to that state law. As part of this, you're going to get a little update, I guess, as to how we're doing in terms of our achieving the RHNA, both from the 5th cycle housing element and also the 6th cycle. And then we will be going into an overview of the SB 35 objective design. So that's just the order of the agenda for this item. So what is SB 35? It was passed as part of the 2017 housing package, which was the kickstart to all of the changes that we have enjoyed since then. It was amended this year by SB 423, largely to kind of rejigger a little bit on the prevailing wage requirements and also making it basically permanent. There's no sort of like sunset date anymore. What it is it created a ministerial approval process, so that means no public hearing for qualifying housing projects, I should note, in cities not meeting the state mandates for housing production. So this is measured through issuance of building permits against your prorated RHNA. It is an opt-in bill, so applicants have to choose to use the provisions of SB 35. It's not just automatically applied. And if there is design review, because it's that no public hearing, it has to be only through objective design standards. So how it's determined, which cities are subject to SB 35 or cities where applicants can opt in to use SB 35, it's an annual determination by HCD. And it applies to cities that don't meet, as I indicated, their RHNA goals for above moderate and lower income housing production. And again, that's measured based on building permits issued. It also applies to cities that don't have a compliant housing element. So for this year, June 30th, HCD made the determination that Santa Monica met our market rate production goals, but fell short on the lower income production goals. And that wrapped up basically the entire fifth cycle, if you can imagine. So for pretty much the whole fifth cycle, we were sort of on the good list, if you will. We were Santa Monica was not subject to SB 35. But when we wrapped up that cycle, just this past year in 2023, we fell short on that lower income part. So what that means is that Santa Monica is subject to SB 35 for qualifying housing projects that contain at least 50% affordable units. So that's really important to understand. It's not just any housing project, it's housing projects that contain at least 50% affordable units. And again, applicants have to opt in to use the SB 35 process. So this is in your staff report. We thought it'd be helpful to show this comparison between the SB 35 process and Santa Monica's administrative approval process, because obviously we have gone through great lengths to create a streamlined approval process for housing, and you can kind of see how it compares. So in terms of the project type definition of a housing project, at least 2 units is the same. In Santa Monica, in order to qualify for that streamlining, you have to have no more than 25% commercial. It doesn't mean that a project can't have more than that. They certainly can and still be considered a housing project under SB 35. But to qualify for Santa Monica's, streamlining process, we wanted projects to have more housing. You can see here that for SB 35, at least 50% on-site affordable to lower income households. In Santa Monica, the 15% is just per our HPP. Across all income categories. And then in SB 35, it's consistency with objective standards, which are eligible for incentives, concessions, and waivers under state density bonus law. And our AA process is the same. You have to be consistent with the zoning ordinance. And they're also, are eligible for incentives, concessions, and waivers under state density bonus law. So fairly similar there. In terms of site requirements, under SB 35, there's no limit on the size of a site that a project could be located on. However, you can see there's a number of environmental preconditions, if you will, on the site. So it can't be on prime farmland. We don't have any of that. Hazardous waste sites, mobile home park, conservation easements, wetlands, floodplains, or very high fire hazard severity zone. You also cannot demolish a historic structure. So in terms of Santa Monica's AA process, under the city council's amendments to that process, it can't be on sites of 1 acre or more. So sites under 1 acre qualify for that AA, but otherwise they would need to go through the development review permit process. One of the hallmarks, I guess, of SB 35 is the prevailing wage and labor requirements. So SB 423, the bill that passed this year, made tweaks particularly to this section. So it used to apply to all projects. It's been refined a bit so that prevailing wages required for projects that are both 11 plus units and non-public work. And this piece about the skilled and trained workforce now only applies for any projects over 85 feet in height. And the healthcare benefits provided for projects with 50 units or more. To qualify for streamlining in Santa Monica, you do not need to comply with, we do not establish requirements like that. For tenant protections, fairly similar. So under SB 35, you can see here projects cannot demolish units that are occupied by tenants within the last 10 years, subject to an affordable deed restriction or any form of rent control. Under Santa Monica's AA, we comply with state law with respect to SB 330. So that's the, replacement of protected units, and you cannot reduce the total number of dwelling units that are on the site between the existing and the proposed project. So this is a chart showing the update on RHNA progress for the fifth cycle, so for the last cycle. So this is what led to the determination that Santa Monica is subject to SB 35 for this reporting year. They'll do it again, so basically what happens is every April we submit our annual progress report to HCD, and then they squash the data, and then, we get a determination roughly around June of every year on which cities are subject to SB 35. So you can see these are basically the final numbers out of the fifth cycle. We hit it out of the ballpark on the above moderate income, but for very low and low income, we fell short. Not extremely short, but not all the units there. And unsurprisingly, you can see, just as an aside, moderate income, traditionally very difficult to produce. Low income is similar. We tend to see a lot of units at the very low income level. That's sort of where, when we have affordable housing projects, they tend to have units that are, dedicated to that income range. So for the sixth cycle, so this is, for the one we're currently in, the 2021 to 2029, you can see this is where we're at right now. It's kind of a progress update. The first column shows, approved projects. So those are the number of units that have been approved that are in our pipeline. And, they're wherever they are in the process. So they got through their land use entitlement. They might be moving through design review. They might be in plan check. Pending, second column is showing, basically all the units that are in review. I will note none of this includes the builder's remedy submittals, which have all been, part of a settlement agreement, at this point. So that's just for clarity. And then the third column there is the ones that are in construction, which will count towards the sixth cycle. So those first three columns, if all of them end up becoming like building permits, they will count towards our sixth cycle RHNA. And then you can see the column of our RHNA assigned for the sixth cycle and what is remaining. So you can see, we have a very, very healthy pipeline kind of overall, largely for the above moderate. But, certainly a lot of work to get there on the very low and low income range, and moderate as well. So what does SB 35 mean for design review? So as I indicated, applicants of housing projects with at least 50% affordable that choose to file an SB 35 application, they will achieve or accomplish design review only through objective standards. So no ARB, no staff approval, anything like that. It's just objective standards, just like reading the zoning code. All other existing zoning standards would still apply, like height and FAR and anything else. I would note Santa Monica's zoning code isn't just straight up zoning. There are actually design standards in there. There are standards that attempt to regulate like building envelope, modulation, and the like. So it's not something brand new to our city. Other projects that are not filed under SB 35, because I think we get this question a lot, does this mean the ARB is disappearing? That's not the case. It's for projects that are not filed under SB 35, so everybody else, they're still subject to the existing review procedures. That includes design review as amended and that process through the housing element implementation. When we went through kind of creating the objective design standards, the key considerations really were how do you translate what the board does, into really objective standards. Not an easy thing to do, but some guiding principles here were that, it wasn't a replacement of the existing zoning standards, so it wasn't like a zoning update, for projects again, because a lot of this was discussed throughout the housing element process. There was a key focus on ensuring that they're not a constraint to housing production and that they are also within the scope of what is design review. So it wasn't, again, a reopener of, standards that have been in place a long time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie at this point to walk you through the design standards.
Jing, before we get into the design stuff, can I ask a question about SB 35 implementation, please?
Sure. Yeah.
So getting back to, I liked your graphic that just compared the two streamlines, because I think the concept that I read in here, or I've heard too, is that people aren't really going to gravitate to SB 35 in Santa Monica because we have a good streamlining process.
Mm-hmm.
My question relates to the affordability levels where we want 15%. I've worked on like 5 or 6 SB 35. Could they go through our streamlined process if every one of their units is at 60% or lower?
Yes. Yeah. If it's 100% affordable, they automatically qualify. Yeah. This was, I'm sorry, I should clarify. This was sort of like for your mixed income market rate project. So I think what you're talking about is you had every unit was affordable, right?
Right.
Yeah. They by definition, like in our code, they always have been eligible. They were always exempt.
Okay, that's fine. As long as the answer is yes, that's good, because then I see the value of doing it. I mean, there's very few. We're taking me.
I mean, if you can see, at least 50% on site, I mean, it's more than likely going to be like
100%
100% affordable,
process.
unless someone is able to do sort of something with substantial amount of affordability. Not out of the question, certainly, but more than likely it'll be the 100.
21 years of approving projects. I worked on projects. I've never seen anybody do anything close to that. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Jing, on what basis are those 50% low-income unit housing buildings exempt from ARB?
This is state law. Yeah. So
State law.
SB 35 is state law. That's right.
Because it seems to me we'll end up with a lot of prison-looking.
Well, that's why we're trying to scramble and do these design guidelines that are objective so that we get some better design.
That's why I'm saying it.
Yeah. Well, state law has been very aggressive. Or you could look at it another way. We were very aggressive at stopping development in the past, and the state felt they had to step in. So maybe we're to blame. Maybe. But however it is, we're stuck with it for now.
Good evening, Stephanie Reich, Design and Historic Preservation Planner. To amplify what Jing has said, the objective design standards would only apply to the SB 35 projects that are at least 50% affordable units, and it's an opt-in. So it's not just automatically granted in that way. And so also, as Jing mentioned, we do have standards already embedded in our code and have for a very long time, standards that regulate building envelope, pedestrian orientation, and so forth. Because there are some new items in the housing implementation, we need to make sure that we are covered for all of the items that the ARB is looking for: pedestrian orientation, open space, what the facades are looking like, and screening parking. So those are some of the categories. We have, for each one of these categories, we have, questions for you to think about. Our projects generally include a mix of street-facing and residential units on the ground floor. So our guiding principles, as Jing said, is engaging a pedestrian experience, sufficient visual interest, and engaging with the street. So what aspects of the residential units, which we haven't allowed before on our commercial boulevards, now we will. How do we make them pedestrian oriented? How do we maintain an active boulevard environment? And so we worked with our consultant AECOM team. We had a great team in-house, and we have a lot of experience with the ARB in developing the kind of fundamental architectural standards, and we drew from that knowledge to develop these. For residential unit entries, the other thing that I'd also want to make sure to mention, one of the really amazing things about the ARB, first of all, we have a very sophisticated and highly functional design review process. We base all of our discussions on fundamental design principles. We are flexible and also direct and consistent. And so we wanted to reflect those values in these objective design standards to find a way to provide some flexibility for applicants and get what we wanted. So, for example, for residential units requiring some entries facing the street, and when entries are facing the street, having a minimum of landing area, and include 3 of the following elements. So that, by providing a menu and a number that we need to get to, like 3 elements, we provide a level of flexibility and also get some of the pieces that we want. So here, for entries, you could include your recessed entry, side light windows, and paving differentiation, and that would be enough. You don't need a stair up or down, but if you choose that, you can have 2 others. So we tried to think of all of the elements that would make for a lively pedestrian environment and require a few of those to be employed. So for non-residential entries, we wanted at least 1 advantage. So say we have, a market that's taking up want at least 1 entry on each street-facing facade. And we want some articulation and hierarchy, architectural hierarchy over that entry. So you have a variety of ideas, canopy, awning, signage, band, porch, or recessed entry to highlight those entries. What we've also found, and there's been a lot of discussion both at the ARB and at the Planning Commission regarding ground floor heights. We'd previously in the downtown had a provision that limited ground floor height to 16 feet. That provision has been lifted because on sloping sites, it's become somewhat of a challenge for architects to make that work for the larger spaces. So is when you have a tall floor-to-floor height to bring that down to the pedestrian scale. So that could be awning, canopy, signage, band, or some kind of architectural projection. Here are some examples shown. So our questions for you, are these standards sufficient for a comfortable and engaging pedestrian environment? Will they make for attractive facades? And are there additional standards or fewer standards we should be including? So transparency. We already have very good transparency requirements in the zoning code. These are supplementing what is already in the zoning code, particularly for residential units at the ground floor, and to ensure that we've got light and air into the units. There's incorporating glazing of at least 30% of the overall facade, We don't have anything like that yet in the zoning code. And then every room that's on an exterior wall can have one operable opening. That's for visual interest, and it has the benefit of light and air and quality of life for the residents. A recessed window we had recommended, and in the documents that were attached to your staff report, we were recommending 3 inches from the face of the facade for a recess for the window or an exterior shading device. In discussing this was a big point of discussion at the ARB because of the potential expense. The ARB has never appreciated flat windows or fake surrounds. But there's some flexibility where we said, okay, 2 inches, which is pretty easy to fur out with a stud, and we see that pretty easily. It doesn't add a lot of cost, or there could, still have that option of having some kind of shading device or some element around the window. Material transitions, this is something tried and true that we tell everyone, that a material transition should occur on an inside corner because you don't want materials to change on an outside corner. That's just not, obviously not good design. So material change on an inside corner, and then the ARB recommended a 3-inch planar change so that you don't have materials changing along the same surface, that the surface has some depth to it, some change in plane. Roof decks and Juliet balconies. We've found that the addition of some proportion of Juliet balconies, a requirement for that, can provide some variation in the overall facade. The roof decks is something that we've seen on every project. So requiring the roof deck to be pushed from the edge when it's nearby adjacent to a residential district to really provide some relief for that adjacent residential structure. And so the ARB thought that the Juliet balcony or the balconette should be clarified. So we're suggesting to add language that it's not allowed to require residents to step beyond the facade. The idea is that you have a floor-to-ceiling window with some railing that prevents you from falling out, obviously. Common open space. Common open space is something that is really prized in the city of Santa Monica. Our climate is amazing, and we have a long history of courtyard design. Courtyards are embedded in our code in lots of ways, and something that we talk about a lot with our applicants and the ARB talks about is how to make the open space a really generative social space, so that it's not simply circulation space that winds up being unused and empty. Because there is a history of vibrance of these social spaces as one of the cornerstones of building community here in Santa Monica. And so here are a number of options and ideas for how to make that common open space really livable and really beautiful. So a maximum of coverage for the common open space, minimum of landscaping, requirement for trees, and requirement for seating. The ARB recommended that we get a little more precise about the amenities that we're looking for, and also ask for a little bit more regarding amenities in those social spaces. So Excuse me. So we would require these common open spaces to have one of the following cooking facilities: edible gardens, pools, spas, water features, exercise space, equipment, play space, table with at least 8 seats. If the Planning Commission believes that there should be more than one of those on that list, please let us know. Entrances and screening. There's, incorporating our parking entries into the overall facade so that we get an overall well-designed facade is really important to the city. And we don't have any standards focused on that. So a requirement that finishes shall wrap into the entries, and that the structured parking needs to be screened. With the new standards that were adopted for implementation of the housing element, we're starting to see some parking at grade. And we want parking above grade, not subterranean parking. So we want all that parking to be screened. We want it all to look in an integrated fashion with the building. It's a difficult one to write a standard for, but we're taking a stab at it with shall be screened with materials that are used elsewhere in the building design. And here are some examples of that. So as Jing mentioned, our approach is to ensure that we're not adding cost to affordable housing projects, that we're providing sufficient standards for the ground floor where there will now be residential units that are facing the street, here are some of the ARB study session comments. So for the ground floor, where entries are provided, where units face the street, so that's what we had asked for in our draft. The ARB asked that we consider standards that require windows or a percentage of glazing on the ground floor. We also had very good participation from the public, as Jing mentioned in our public outreach session, our virtual session, and also at the ARB. We had some comments, and the ARB responded to those comments. So one of those comments was a challenge of incorporating mechanical equipment and other requirements, such as, trash facilities and so forth, where there's not an alley. So making sure that that our design requirements aren't at cross purposes with the functional requirements at the ground floor. For the facade, as we talked about, the ARB suggested 2-inch window surrounds rather than 3, and maintaining the option for a shading device. For open space, defining Juliet balconies, further defining social space and amenities, and to scale the number of social space amenities based on the total number of residential units. So if you've got a building with 25 residential units, may not need as many amenities as if you have a project with 75 or 100 residential units. There was a question raised in public comment whether or not vine walls, we're seeing a lot of green walls technology incorporated into projects, whether or not those should be included in and counted towards our landscape requirement. Currently, we're really only calculating in the floor plan the area that for landscaping. And in discussing it with the Architectural Review Board and looking at what's happened on projects that have proposed vines and then they don't work so that they're taken off, the ARB suggested not to give credit towards those minimum landscaping requirements because it's less predictable. And those green walls are pretty costly, especially, you have to have really good management. They require, constant maintenance. Pulling out dead plants, within 2 weeks, I think is something that I've written in for some city. So our questions for you as you enter into discussion, ground floor design, will the proposed standards get the kind of active urban environment at the street that we want? Will the standards enable the kind of fabulous buildings that we see built in Santa Monica? And how should residential units engage the street to continue to create that street environment? For open space, facade, and parking, are they also sufficient for that kind of social engagement that we want in our common open space and in our courtyards? Will these lead to the kind of fabulous looking buildings so that we don't have structures that that look anything less than what we're getting now? And so with that, we're taking questions and really want your comments.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Who wants to start?
First, thank you for that. From a technical standpoint, are we making recommendations to the ARB or are they making recommendations to us? Like, is this an actual code that we're going to recommend to City Council? What are we doing here exactly?
ARB recommendations get incorporated, as do yours, and it goes to council.
Right, but this is going to be an adopted code section.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, to clarify, this is, the next step is December 12th. This will be presented to the city council as an interim zoning ordinance. Because as I explained, Santa Monica is subject to SB 35 for those, 50% affordable housing projects. So we really must have something in place in case somebody walks in the door with an application.
Got it. Okay. So, hold on, now I've lost my train of thought. So entrances. Oh, well, first about the format of what this is. So the examples you showed were great. Would that all buildings looked like some of those? That would be great. So is this code going to be an illustrated code? Is that a possibility?
Not right now, no. This is an interim zoning ordinance,
Right,
maybe
so, okay.
eventually.
Yes.
If and when, as Jing mentioned, we're doing so well that we're not going to have to, not all of the housing projects will be subject, but we are developing them so that we can be prepared just in case. And in that case, we will certainly consider illustrating that for ease of implementation. We want everyone to understand what we're talking about.
Right, well, especially since you can't tell them anything.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, I mean, we can illustrate it, but ultimately, because these are objective standards, I mean, can we promise that, if you're really looking at like, did you comply? I mean, you can see the way they're written. Did you do one of the following? They might not do all of it, right? That is the limitation of this, so.
And we, for see what's working and change it if it's not.
Brass tacks. I have to bring up my favorite topic, fences and hedges.
Not historic?
Huh?
I'm sorry, go on.
Historic fences and hedges.
Yeah,
It's historic, it's her historic interest.
yeah, it's a historic interest in fences and hedges. So with those street-facing unit entries in multi-unit buildings, we have seen a lot of people say, oh, well, and then there's going to be a planter box, and then it's going to, and I believe that we really need something that says transparency above. still has to be transparent, 42 inches above the sidewalk.
I don't,
think
we
that's
didn't
in this-
include that here, but I thought we'd certainly written that.
It might be in the Bergamo, in the
Yeah,
concepts.
we
Yeah,
can-
yeah.
We can incorporate that here.
I mean, I think, one thing to be very mindful of is that, number one, these will, more than likely doesn't work, they will just waive it under state density bonus law. We're very much aware of that. So, we wanted, what you see presented here is kind of a balance, of something that is workable and not like too onerous, because what we've seen is, and I will use what we know as the daylight plane. I mean, every single project that we have filed right now has waived that requirement, which probably tells us something about.
But that's a functional thing about the building. I mean,
Yeah.
this is an aesthetic, visual street.
It's also can be functional. If, a project that on Santa Monica Boulevard and 26th Street, affordable housing project, as it faces Santa Monica Boulevard, has, I believe, a 5-foot enclosure for those patios. That's not 50% open, but somewhat open, and it's not terrible.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, when the commission had talked about this in the past, there's sort of a balance also of, when we are having residential units facing public streets, this is a new thing. Some of them are pretty busy streets. And, is that going to be something that balances, again, residential units facing these busy streets and sort of privacy
Right. Well,
concerns and
it's-
what have you?
Yeah. I don't know. This is where I start getting, the way I get.
No, we
No,
we
I
don't
mean,
di-
this
we
is
don't
a
dis-
city and
we don't
streets-
we don't disagree with
Yeah.
you. Right.
I mean, I
finding
feel
that
like
balance.
having it in the code, they can waive it if it's unworkable, but at least they know what we want. And we want our streets to be open. And I believe, as you've all heard me say a million times, that fences and walls are exclusionary, and it's part of a systemically racist way of thinking that keeps people who aren't like me away from me. And I just feel like we have to think differently, and we have to be really consistent in order to make a change. So that's why I bring it up every time, and
Noted.
thank you. Sorry, I need to wear different glasses to see this. Okay. So in terms of, for the recessed windows, you said that, I thought I read, but I didn't quite see you right, that they can opt for the 2-inch recessed if they use something else to create some kind of articulation. Did I
A
understand that right?
2-inch recess, or they can have some kind of element, some shading device on the exterior.
So if they have no shading device, it has to be 3 inches.
Well,
what you just said?
what we're suggesting, because, honestly, we were workshopping the 3 inches, and when we talked to the ARB, we spent some time on this because it's important and also, a challenge. So we landed on 2 inches, which I think we'll move forward with, 2 inches or a shading device. It's not both.
So if you have a shading device, it can be flat.
It can be flush.
Okay, that's what I just
That's
couldn't
right.
understand what
And just
the
so that,
recommendation is.
and if y'all know anything about the technical aspects of something called a nail-on window, right? So that nailing fin goes in over the plywood and under already about 7/8 of an inch
Right.
recessed. So we're just asking for some
One
additional
more
furring.
inch, right, okay. So then about I love the balconettes. I'm a little, I mean, I guess this is not really in the purview of this. I mean, the things that you suggest for the open spaces to activate them kind of proves another one of my historically brought up points, that people should get together in our public parks and that these building spaces are taking up area that we could use for housing. So are these, they just seem a little fancy to me, I guess
Well,
water features and,
Well, I mean, water features is an interesting thing on that list. What we are seeing, the buildings that we are seeing are highly amenitized. The units are smaller, and there are lots of
right, the drawings have glasses of Chardonnay in them. Right.
Well, and also, I mean, there are certain requirements for affordable housing projects. So affordable housing projects do need a child's play area. So, so that's required for the funding for the project, and so they do what's required and they meet these requirements.
Well, I guess I would just suggest racking the brain and trying to come up with a broader list.
We've seen that on a lot of our affordable housing projects, spaces for folks to have their own gardens, on the roof or on a patio, so.
I mean, usually in these apartment buildings, after a while, there's like one tenant who decides to be the gardener. So, I mean, that's cool and that does the job. But, just kind of making sure that we're not upscaling the tone.
Absolutely.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, these are all based on things that we've seen in our projects.
Okay. All right. I think those are all my notes. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great comments.
Commissioner Landers.
So we have a lot of what you might call objective design standards in our building code to start with.
Zoning code.
In our zoning code, in our zoning code, right? So we've already laid out some expectations about what, and so this is going a step further to get a little bit more specific in a way that is objective according to the state definition, which I understand. Here's what I'm struggling with. So if we go back to even the first slide, right, where you were talking about front stoops. My misunderstanding, but how do we reconcile these residential unit entrances with, say, ADA requirements?
So often what we will see is, we don't always see residential entries at the street.
Right.
Often we will see internal entries, right? There is often a grade change. So managing that grade change is finding a way to manage it in a beautiful way is something that we're interested in.
But let's say that a developer wanted to do front stoops, but also wanted to create a handicapped unit that didn't have a step. Does the way that the way that this is drafted right now enable that level of creativity?
Well, it certainly does not preclude you meeting your ADA requirements, right? And we're this,
Okay.
right?
I think also to put a finer point on it, the standards here do not require a stoop. There's nothing that says you have to have a stoop. It's a 3-foot covered landing area, which doesn't have to be elevated. It could just be a area. And then it's 3 of the following, and it's an option. So you see one of the options is one stair up or down, you don't have to do that one. So it provides many different ways to, obviously you must comply with ADA, but also achieve whatever design they want to do. This was a topic of discussion at ARB, obviously practicing architects who do a lot of multi-unit residential projects. They were, I think, quite comfortable with this in terms of, I think they were saying you normally achieve that access kind of through the interior circulation of the building. It wouldn't really be from the street.
Because the word objective design standard, the phrase is just, where I think we're all wrapping our heads around that. But in looking, I sort of looked at some objective design standards from other cities and, depending on where they are in the process. And I think what is helpful is those cities that say, our intent for these standards is X, and in service of that intent, right? Our intent is accessibility. Our intent is human scale design. Our intent is sufficient light, sufficient shade, right? So part of what the feedback that I would offer, on some of these, like what you talked about with the vines, the green walls, I thought was really helpful because it was sort of saying, if we allow it to count and then it goes away, we've lost everything. So let's not count it in. If they want to add it, that's fine, but let's not make, right? That, because the intent is to have some greenery, and to have we have to phrase that in an objective way that, that nature and residents need to coexist, right?
Yes, we've for all of these standards, we've developed intent statements that we can certainly incorporate. That there is the intent and then there is the standard. So the intent doesn't remove the objective nature of the standard.
Right. I think it helps clarify it. And I would encourage you to include it precisely because if the question of workability comes up, I understand that, right, there's, things get waived, but we should be communicating that our goals are sustainability standards, certain human scale standards, certain access, certain livability. And so each of these is in service of that. I think that intent would be helpful.
Yeah, it's in I think that, just depends how we draft it. We can, there are intent statements for all of these. But you cannot review a project based on intent, right? It has to still be the standard. So although you can communicate an intent, and if someone does something that you don't expect, if it still complies with the standard, we must approve it. So that's just, I just want to be clear. So we can certainly include it in the preamble of these, but it is, an intent is not a standard.
Okay, that is helpful. Because I feel like a lot of I have the sense, I thought this was helpful, but not that I agree with all of what's in it, but, the city of Gilroy, right? They have intent. They have quite a lot of massing and orientation. They have standards for massing and orientation, a lot of which we've covered in our zoning code, and we're not covering here. But it was helpful to say, oh, you're doing that for that reason. I think it made it clearer to the public and clearer in the conversation. I understand that everything is waivable and that you can't enforce those standards, but this is going to be very hard to explain. I mean, it continues to be very hard to explain, and building those connections, I think, is important.
Agreed.
That's what I got. Because otherwise I feel like take them, otherwise I'm between, to your question, not enough. Are there too many? This feels like you could just sort of go down the vortex and come up with hundreds of ideal objective design standards that all of which could be waived or implemented.
That's why we want clear and concise design standards.
Exactly.
And comments on the dais.
Indeed.
Yeah, and we don't, early on in the development of, objective design standards, I was part of a panel with someone from HCD, and she was saying how, she saw a set of standards that had, 200 standards, and those were not going to be approved because they, were clearly unworkable. So if you notice the documents that you received as attachments for this item were pretty short. And we thought that was great.
Okay, other comments from commissioners? I know I still have a couple of comments here, but go ahead, Commissioner, Vice Chair Raskin. And let me take just a short intermission for just a second. Do we have a speaker?
Not for this item.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Commissioner Raskin, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I was waiting. I'm kind of curious to hear what Commissioner Hamilton has to say about this, given your line of work. And given that, as Sherry said, I think realistically the projects that are going to be using these are, by and large, 100% affordable housing projects. There's a part of my mind that almost doesn't want any objective design standards for affordable housing projects that are at least 100% affordable housing projects, because each and every one of these will be yet another cost burden. At risk of Commissioner Tolkien breaking me over the coals for this, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes into folks in a community finding a building ugly when folks who would otherwise live there wouldn't have a place to live at all. And I'm curious if you're aware of any jurisdictions that have essentially not adopted any objective zoning code, and you've got to comply with the CBC. So we're just not going to add on any other additional SB 35 requirements.
Oh, certainly. Our neighboring city of Los Angeles doesn't have any objective design standards. What I don't disagree with you. We're very focused on not adding cost to projects. What we have seen is remarkable. Most of the affordable housing that we see in Santa Monica is as good or better in their designs than market rate housing. So I don't think any of this will be a burden to our affordable housing developers at all.
Yeah, I think where I'm landing is I would prefer to give folks more flexibility, understanding that a lot of this will be accomplished through the design process anyway.
But these are for where there's not the design process. There's no design process associated with these objective design standards. None.
Right. I didn't mean a formal like ARB process. I'm talking
Right.
more just what our architects do,
Right.
at their office.
Very direct follow-up, right on your point.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So, to Commissioner Raskin's point, which is what I was taking a long way to get to, if we walked around right now and we looked at some of our favorite subjectively favorite affordable housing structures in Santa Monica, like the ones that win architectural design prizes, how many of from compliance? Because I think they're pretty great buildings, and maybe there's a way to kind of inductively build a set of standards that says we want it to look more like what's already here because it's awesome.
Well, we actually did that.
Okay.
One of the things that you're seeing in these standards, particularly with the residential unit standards and the standards for residential at the ground floor, which is one of the focus of this effort, we don't have right now residential units at the street. We're having community rooms. If you think of all the affordable housing projects that you can think of, the Arroyo on Lincoln Boulevard, there's a great one on, I think it's 14th and Broadway, a lot of really beautiful affordable housing projects. None of them have residential units at the street level. And so since we're expecting that to be as a result of the implementation for the housing element, we want some design standards for this new thing that we haven't seen along the boulevards. And so, yeah, we don't see these because we don't have that use on the ground floor. But do we see the balconettes? Yes, on the Arroyo, we see the balconettes. They're fabulous. Do we see recessed windows? Yes, we do. Do we see amenitized I don't think any of the projects, even our not favorite projects, although all of them are our favorites, would meet these standards.
Okay, let's get back to Commissioner Raskin. Do you
Yeah, I think I'll end my comments there.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Yeah, question. So of all the affordable housing projects built in the last few years, it sounds like none of those projects went through the SB 35 streamlining process,
No.
right? So then what standard did they adhere to? Just the typical zoning code?
We do have some design standards embedded in the zone. And so as Jing mentioned in the beginning of this, in addition to making certain that we're to try to mirror the ARB process and the principles that are used in that process within an objective design standards that maintains some level of flexibility for our applicants.
Have we heard anything from the developers who went through our standard process that the standard that they were held to was adding cost and was not adding value?
You mean our current process?
Yeah, the ones that, built since SB 35 was law.
I think I'll note, these standards are, they haven't, I think, been vetted by housing developers yet. This has been published. We had the workshop.
Yeah.
We had members of the development committee at that workshop. With affordable housing providers, primarily with respect to the SB 35 standards, because they have been, I think we've moved the needle some since ARB's study session, where we got good feedback, and the ARB, like I said, was very focused on ensuring that these standards are not creating more cost, understanding the kinds of projects we're dealing with. So I think we're going to need to do another pass, at that to just ensure that there's not something in here, that is creating a problem. We've done that work in terms of reviewing existing projects, and that's why, you see, like, these are a fairly limited set of standards.
Yeah.
It is for that reason. They were meant to reflect, like, are people already doing this? That was the sniff test, if you will.
Yeah,
It wasn't
I get-
something new.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, we have all these, we've had a handful of affordable housing projects that have been constructed and completed using our standard, the general standards they haven't utilized SB 35, thus they haven't had to deal with the objective design standard issue. I guess it would be helpful to understand that, why not just mirror what we already have in the objective design standard
that's the intent.
if that process is working.
Right.
And then I guess if we were to make any modifications, it would be helpful to know, and getting feedback from the development to understand, like, okay, we're moving from this high standard to a different standard that is still so we know we're moving from one state to one standard to a different standard, what that actual change is. Because it seems like the process is already working I would assume. But the developers might say, well, we did go through that standard process, but, the window setbacks were adding $10 per, unit in cost that we didn't need to incur. So we want to change that standard to now 3 inches instead of 5 inches, whatever it is. So at least we know we're going from like, a 5-inch to a 3-inch standard, because you can still have a good building with a 3-inch setback for windows. It's just,
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about the current process. In the current process, staff my team will work with all our applicants to provide comments as early as possible, design comments that are consistent with what the board provides. We work with them in a collaborative manner so that we to the Architectural Review Board with potentially some comments for them to review, agree with, or not. The board then will provide, they'll review the project, and the difference is the prescriptive nature of the review. So, at the moment, we have 6 architects and 1 real estate professional on the board, which is really highly unusual to have that many architects on your design review board, and some of them are nationally and internationally known. So they have a respect for the architect that stands at the podium and presents to them, and they say, here's what we want you to do. We're not going to tell you how to do it, right? An objective design standard doesn't really have that luxury. And so the way that we're providing that level of flexibility in most of these cases is to one, choose 3, and so it's getting at the same fundamental principles, but in a different way because it's a different process. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to compare, like there's no way for me to tell you, well, the recess that the board had asked for was 5 inches. Actually, it's not something that we talk about a lot because we don't see a lot of. We do ask for some important details to be part of our application requirements so that we understand what the details are, and those get embedded in the approval. So if the applicant wants to change it for something that's less expensive, which often happens, they come to staff, we work with them so that the intent of the approval is met, but they can reduce the cost. And so we do that constantly with all these projects.
okay.
I want to get some comments in too, since you've already spoke first.
I have a question.
But I haven't spoke at all.
Okay.
So let me get in. Are you done, sir? If you're not, then we'll, okay. Okay, I think just in response to some of the things we have to be, that I've heard tonight, I think we need to be a little careful too, is affordable housing projects have always been extremely highly designed, and that's why we see such nice projects throughout the area. But a lot of the reason we had to do that is because, not we, well, a lot of people, they had to do that is because the communities were so unreceptive to their projects, because they were going to be bigger, taller, denser buildings. So they really So I'm not going to guarantee that the level of architectural design for those projects is going to stay the same, because there's a lot of cost in that design. So we need to keep that in the back of our mind. And I think that my experience on SB 35 projects, which by the way, that Wilcox project I saw you at was an SB 35 project. My clients would do anything to stay away from it, because nobody likes nobody cares about the affordability. Nobody wants the labor standards, and the labor standards are only being increased in this next version. So there's more likely, so it's just less likely, I think, people are going to be there. But I do believe we need to have some standards, and so I'm happy we're going down this path. And I want to know when we had a community input, when the architects who are designing in our community, what comments did they have and what comments did we incorporate that they had? I'm curious.
Well, most of the comments that we incorporated from the Architectural Review Board many of them were generated by the developers and members of the public who joined us. But just so that you know, the architects on the ARB also design projects here. So they're familiar with the
Okay, so you're saying you did incorporate comments from other architects who are not on the board?
Yes, specifically the window discussion was talked about initially by members of the public session. Let's see, what else? The balconette was also something that was discussed. You know, each and every one of the comments that were raised by the public, the architects in the public, were discussed by the board. The board didn't always agree with the recommended solution, but each one was discussed.
Okay, because as I tried to kind of gauge where people's comments were on this from talking to some of the architects who I'm aware of who are not on the RP board, you know, they were very concerned about the entrances and the ADA issue. And I guess I think where they're hung up is we call them entrances. So it assumes it kind of dictates it's the only option to get into the building. It can't be. It's illegal.
It's not.
I just don't think we're gonna. I mean, I think that's a sensitive issue, and I think maybe it's just a wording that if you didn't call it entrances, and you found some other way of articulating that, it's a minor point. But I know that I got some really aggressive comments back to me when I asked people about.
We are not requiring raised or lowered entries. You know, as you know.
I know, but it says residential entrances at the very top, and that's where I think people get caught on that, and it's just that simple. And then I have to get an earful from people of saying, don't these people understand that it's illegal to do this, that we can't do it?
Well, it says ground floor residential units shall have either an entrance or private outdoor living area facing the street.
I can read that part, but it's the big blue letters on the top above that. That's where I think that's where people are getting caught up. So it's just a very easy fix, I think.
So we'll retitle that to read ground floor.
Whatever works.
Ground floor residential unit ground floor interface.
Something like that.
And yeah, we can.
And that's probably more accurate.
You know, the title of it, if that's throwing people off, that's really good information to have. Thank you.
Well, I'm just telling you, I talked to 3 different architects, and each one of them got very agitated on that. Like, we brought this up, and it's still here. They're not hearing us. So.
Sure. So we can retitle that. It wouldn't change the intent. We're happy to do that. I would note that I think, as Ms. Reich earlier explained, this is because we don't generally see residential units on the first floor, and so there aren't standards in the zoning ordinance. That's what this intent was for. And as you said, there are options in there, but we can retitle it to make that more clear.
And in fact, I would love to see that design. And when pushing for residents on the ground floor, you know, I kind of assumed we would see something like that, but not knowing ADA code. So then I will also continue to push back even on the 2-inch facades that if it adds cost, we probably shouldn't have it on there. And then I would ask you guys just clarify one thing, because this is something that I've been struggling with in our projects. You talk about 25% of the common areas being landscaped, and just make a clear statement in there. Is it per space or is it total aggregate of the project?
Okay, we'll be clear.
Thank you. Other than that, I did not have any other. I mean, I appreciated the brevity of this, and I understand the point is to try to put some, let's say, guardrails on it. And obviously, we can't do too much because people will just
Wait,
density bonus around it. Yes, sir.
So I'll keep this fast, but you said something that actually it was covered in the meetings with the architects. You said, we know what we've seen, we don't know what we haven't seen yet. And it occurs to me, can you go back to the slide with the difference between the DVL, like all the way at the beginning, what's SB 35? And I'm wondering, keep going further back. Being built on boulevards. And I'm wondering whether there are, you know, we're talking about SB4 earlier, we have R2 sites with large parking lots. And it occurred to me as you were, I mean, that, for example, in a neighborhood like where, you know, some of the churches are north of Wilshire, you front stoop kind of townhomes that are market rate and then affordable, you know, the 50% affordable housing stacked on top of them. And so I'm wondering whether, I don't know whether those projects would go SB 35. I don't know. You know, they might be disincentivized. There might be easier ways for them to go. But if they did, have you kind of checked this list against the realities of those kinds of projects where maybe it looks a little bit like what we did a few years ago, you know, with right when I joined the commission, sorry, I'm blanking on the street name, but like there was stoops along Vicente Terrace, and then we had apartments above them. Right. And we wouldn't necessarily want to impose or list design standards on the interior that's not facing a street. It's facing another set of buildings. And you could see a wraparound project sitting on a very large parking lot like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering whether you've checked, you know, are we checking this? It's a correction of my earlier question where I said, did we look at what's there? There are other kinds of projects that are going into R2, going into R3.
well, you know, I have the pleasure of looking at all of the projects that are not single-family houses. And so, so myself, my team, and the ARB, we bring all of that experience and knowledge when we're writing this. So yeah, we do.
And do you have a sense of whether where you think this list is most likely to come into play at all based on the suitable sites in Santa Monica?
You know, so far we've seen a little bit of residential units at the ground floor street level. We're seeing some residential units on the ground floor that's sort of faced internally to courtyards so far. We've started now to see structured parking above grade. So that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, those are two things that are really different that are a result of what you've done here with the adoption of the implementation for the housing element. And so because we're starting to see that, we're trying to address those issues because we hadn't seen
that you just made that would discourage the production of residential units that are so internally oriented that they present a fortress-like facade on the street. That we do want to avoid.
No, because we want every unit's got an entry and every unit's got an outdoor space, right? So we want one of those things at the street.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say, you can't codify good design. You got to get talented architects, trained, well-trained, and put them in control. Give them a minimum amount of constraints and let them go. And that's the bottom line. I mean, this is all well-meaning, but the state has taken and perhaps given us an unsolvable problem in terms of getting better architecture and solving the low-income housing problem.
Yeah.
That's all.
I know this is a statement and you didn't ask a question, but I would say I agree with you that there are architects who are not as good as other architects.
You're right.
And that's why you need these minimum guardrails.
And the architects
substitute
don't
for that.
necessarily make the rules for what gets built. It's very often.
Engineer.
So it's very difficult to make sure that great design is done with objective design standards. What we want to make sure is that it's always good and it's never bad.
Good luck. So I'm sorry. I have something you said I have a question on, which is about parking. And you're saying you're seeing more at grade parking, podium level parking or something?
We're starting to see above grade parking. I've seen so far one project that has parking at grade and at the second and third levels.
What change did we make that's promoting that?
It's the additional.
I think to be clear, those may have been refile of what were formerly builder's remedy projects. So I don't think I would tie it to a change that we made per se that incentivized that or anything like that. There are proposals at this point. We haven't seen a building built with that yet, but they
haven't
there
gone
are
to ARB
projects-
yet.
Yeah, there are projects that haven't been, haven't fully gone through the process. They're obviously still in review.
Well, I was just curious if there was something that we specifically
No, I don't think
did
there
that
was-
kind of supported that.
Yeah, there's not something in the code that necessarily, triggered that. We're certainly seeing, what we are seeing is projects refiling, because of the benefits of state density bonus law.
Okay, and then on the parking issue, I understand the screening and I'm supportive of it. There was metal gauge in there, which in my mind means that there's some perforation and ventilation. Is that an
Yeah,
accurate? 'Cause-
for above grade park, 50% open so that they're not mechanically ventilated.
Right, that's exactly where I was heading, is that's an important thing for the commissioners to understand too, is that when a lot of cities tried to just enclose those areas, but it increased their energy use, which is.
Yeah,
the
no,
opposite.
we know it's got to be open.
Okay, great. Commissioner, Vice Chair Raskin.
Yeah, so just a process question. So I understand, so next week, next meeting, we're going to talk about the Bergamot area standards.
That's
So-
right. We have, those are more conceptual.
Got it. And so I assume, given the timeline, we're not going to be looking at the fully cooked text of the IZO before it goes to council?
You will not, no. I mean, IZOs actually don't need a recommendation from the planning commission, but, we just as a matter of practice, we've always brought at least the concepts to you. So the way the IZO works is it's actually, we're not writing an ordinance. What we intend to do is actually have the ordinance be kind of like operative to allow the council to adopt a resolution for objective design standards. It makes it a lot easier to amend them if we need to, as opposed to the kind of bigger process. Not that it's not a bigger process for resolution, but it's just less steps, if you will. So that's what we intend to do in ability to change them without having to, go back to amend the IZO, right, which is a big, long process.
Wait, I'm sorry. I guess I zoned out there.
Oh.
Why is it easier to amend them? That again?
It just reduces the steps. Like if we have to amend an IZO, it just, we have to go through like 2 readings in 30 days and all, unless we do it as an emergency, I suppose. But it's just, if we do it by resolution, it just gives us like, it takes immediate effect. It's, 1 reading. I mean, it's just procedurally, it's just easier to deal with.
Okay.
If we find out like things aren't working,
And so it would be easier going forward as well. It would provide more flexibility for council to amend the rules because, if it was codified eventually into the zoning ordinance, that's 3 trips to PC and a trip to, and 2 trips to council and 30 days after that, right? But this way, that flexibility can be built in and adopted and become effective in one night. Going to the council.
That's efficient. I mean, ultimately, though, this interim, we're going to learn from it, and then we're going to codify it, in 2 years or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we will see kind of what, like I said, we need to do another pass with our affordable housing providers. We have kind of a good round table there. And, obviously we'll see if anybody files a project, right? And see how it works. I think we'll learn from it. Like, this is kind of our first foray, and we have not been subject to SB 35 for the last 8 years or so. So
They're fun.
2 quick technical notes.
Hold on a second. I got
Okay.
Commissioner Raskin first.
Sorry, so just following up on that, so this, have you given any thought then if we're taking this procedural approach to maybe, and I don't know if this is okay under SB 35 or 423, to delegate authority to someone in the planning department to further give interpretive guidance as to how these objective standards should be more or less objective? I don't know how you do it in an objective way, but
You can't give somebody.
You need an AI.
right.
yeah, I don't know. I'm
So yeah.
talking on the fly here in a way that probably doesn't make sense.
I mean, I think if the question you're asking is like authority to interpret, I mean, I sit as the zoning administrator as well. I have that authority anyways, I guess, and so we could include that in the ordinance.
But isn't that exactly what?
But
That's exactly what SB 35 is trying to get away from.
right.
is
But
even-
I also want to be. Yeah, I mean, we would do it in a way that isn't where we're not introducing subjectivity into this because that's not what it's supposed to be for.
Yeah, it's
Has
just
to
a
be clear.
standard that's
Right, the standard
interpreted
is the
like any
standard,
other
and-
standard.
I think if it's somehow unclear, it would signal to us, well, we need to write it to make it clear.
4 quick technical. Whether you're referring to building edges that are adjacent to a property line, or if you're looking at a large parking lot where you might have a roof deck on an interior building, do you still want the setback? You might, but I think the sentence is less clear than we might want it to be. That's one note.
Just to note, this language is not the language that is in that will be used.
Okay, so
It's abbreviated.
Great.
for
So-
abbreviation purposes.
that's fine. I'm just noting. You have a minimum of 24-inch box street for every 500 square feet, and then at least 50% shall be shade trees. If you find yourself in a situation where there's only one tree, it might be good to specify that first tree should be a shade tree, or not, but we should tell people. And then my last comment is on the screening on the facade shall be screened with materials, and this goes back to this question. Is there a reason that you that are in the building design, but if they're going outside the building design, is there a reason that you've only limited it to those 4, or would you consider adding a 5th that says some other material that meets a minimum structural standard? Because you've listed 4 things and
Yeah.
people are innovative.
We can think about how to write that.
Okay. That's just the kind of, and I was looking at the seating looks okay. It's prescriptive, but I don't think it adds cost.
Anybody else?
That was super helpful.
We're here to help. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to keep moving on our agenda. So that was 8B. I'm going to move to 9. We had no continued items. We have no administrative staff items. We have no public hearings. So, commissioners, I'm going to stop really quick. We have a late chit came in for 8A, and I would ask that we open. I don't know if the term is a public hearing, but we hear from this. So I'm going to make a motion and would like a second.
Second.
Okay, Gideon Brower, you are welcome to come up, and you have 3 minutes. And I believe I think you also sent us a letter. Is that possible? Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I had the wrong time for the meeting, so
Don't worry about it.
I'm sorry I missed that discussion. Yeah, my wife and I own a townhouse in Ocean Park, and we would like to be able to install a heat pump, but we can't do it because of current setback requirements. So I'm just here to kind of follow up on the information that I had submitted. I don't know if you had seen it, but just to make sure that you did see it. And I had sort of laid out the specific issues that we're facing. I don't know specifically how common those are to other people who are, whether those are mostly ones that we face, but I imagine that there are plenty of other, we're in a 5-unit condominium townhouses that has it was built in 1971 and is non-conforming in a number of ways. The only option for us is to put it on the roof, which we've been told is too dangerous to service and also too far from the indoor. And the rear setback is actually owned by one of the units. It's not because of the way that the city defines the setbacks. That rear setback is actually the side yard of one of the units. So our options are all defined as side setbacks or a front setback. So I just specifically, I don't know if I wanted to answer any questions that you might have regarding my situation, but a couple of things regarding that. And one is that it does make a big difference for our situation in terms of the interior setback, whether the clearance required is 2.5 feet or 3 feet. And the other is that we have non-conforming porches that are a couple of feet back from the street. And I wonder if it might be possible to consider allowing the outdoor condenser units to be placed under existing porches, because that's not actually, it's not adding any intrusion into a setback. It's already, a structure is already there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, sir, in this forum, we can't have a dialogue as much as I'd like to. But what I would tell you is, because of your letter and because of other things that have happened, we had a hearing on this tonight where staff presented to us, hey, we have issues with this. I urge you to go back and listen to our hearing and see what we were proposing and to comment on that with staff, because they are at some point are going to come back to us. And I'm afraid that's as much as I can really interact with you at this point. But we appreciate you bringing it up because it is a goal of the city. We do want people to electrify their homes.
Yeah.
And we do see the conundrum here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, getting back to the we just heard a little more about. If you haven't read them, I urge you to read them. Do we have any planning commissioner comments or discussion items at this point? Seeing none, I'm going to, yes, sir.
Yeah, just apropos of what Commissioner Landers and Commissioner Hamilton said earlier about the bike action plan, I do encourage everyone to watch the council meeting last night on the Vision Zero item of 16C. It's very informative. So,
Thank you. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 8:35 and wish you all a good evening.